All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be. Here for our next Monday Masterclass. I'm Scott Burleson, the host of your radio show this hour. Dan's not with us. I'll be flying solo today, and so I'll need to periodically see me looking to the side. I'll be checking our waiting room, making sure there's no folks in there waiting. But we're going to talk today about analyzing data within the preference after preference interview. So let me share my screen, and I like the size of our group. We've got a good size group for all the questions and conversations that we need to have. Geographical trivia, sample sizes, whatever tickles your fancy today. But also with that, yeah, feel free to, if you raise your hand, I probably won't see it. If you put something in the chat box, I probably won't see it. So just unmute and just and chime in. Feel free to say anything at any time. But can everybody see my screen? And we're looking at the Blueprinter software.
Yep, we can see it.
All right, beautiful. Thank you for that. So we'll begin by, we're in the demo project, which of course you all have access to. And so within this, we're talking about what after discovery interviews. So we're in here in preference. And you've already conducted your interviews. So here's like you interviewed Amazon. You asked them, how important is it to you to minimize likelihood of damage from moisture? And how satisfied is your capability to minimize the likelihood of damage from moisture? So when we talk about analyzing the data, we're really talking about how we study and how we determine the priorities based on those two scores. So we've got importance and satisfaction. And so maybe it would be helpful to give a little reminder here, go back to Project Home. So within our step 2, discovery interviews, our goal was to uncover a large set of customer outcomes with customers. And hopefully we have those outcomes worded very well so that they're solution independent as possible, completely unambiguous. Now we've moved to step 3, and our goal is to prioritize that list. And so we've completed our discovery interviews. And so we're going to move down here into analyzing preference data. So you can see we've got these different market views. We'll go into those. But the first thing we're going to look at when we're going to analyze our data, we're going to look at all interviews, which is to say that we're going to look at our entire population, or not our population, our entire sample population, I should say. So within that, we have importance versus satisfaction here. We can see the amount of variation. This is going to be very key to our analysis. So I'll come back to there, but before getting too deep into any one thing, we'll have an overview. Let's take an overview of all of our data. So we have the bubble charts. I like using the 1 to 10. These happen to be a tight distribution in importance versus satisfaction. And then of course we have this MSG chart, which is the difference in importance and satisfaction. So the higher this number, the greater the gap between importance and satisfaction. Fairly simple measure, and there's the formula right there. But you can just think of this as the gap difference between importance and satisfaction. And the heat map, we're not going to go into a whole lot. That's really not today. That's more about, the additional benefit for a particular outcome. So that's going to be more or less out of scope of our conversation. So we've got these 3. I'll click back through them. The importance and satisfaction on one versus the other. The real value of this one is to see how much variance there is for each outcome. But the one I actually like to begin, and this MSG is ultimately, once we have confidence in our numbers, this is the chart we're going to use to prioritize. In other words, this is the priority. This 43 is greater than, 43, 40, 37. That's the order I would go in from the high, or there's the 38 right here. If you're wondering why they're not in absolute order, it's because they're actually listed in order of the most important to the least important as rated. But for the purposes of prioritizing, you'll go with the biggest gap. So 43% would be your greatest, 40% would be the next, and then 38 and 37. And by the way, we do have a new, we do have a software upgrade. It'll come out later this year in which you can actually change the order of this. So if you want, right now it's ordered by importance, but you will be able with the future release to reorder this by the market satisfaction gap score. So this is the number we ultimately want to get to, because again, the higher number, the more significant an opportunity it is. But before we do that, the one of these charts I like. Okay, there we've got somebody in the waiting room. All right, welcome, Justin. The chart I like to begin with is the bubbles chart, and here's why. I like to get an idea of what the shape of the data is. So in this particular demo, you can see we have really sort of two clusters. So again, this is importance versus satisfaction. We have a cluster of some outcomes here and a cluster there. But with any other project, maybe you've got one way out by itself, or it could be, and of course, one out by itself in this range, this northwestern range, high importance, low satisfaction. What that tells us, that's something really significant. If we have a few that are up here where it's very important and very satisfied, well, we know that's very close to a must-have. In other words, we have to at least maintain performance there with our next product, but it's also not a great opportunity to improve it. If we improve satisfaction for something here, look, it's already high. Where's it? We can't really do much. So anything that's to the sort of the left, or I'll call it the west side, we have an opportunity to improve satisfaction for our new product. And anything that's up high importance, well, if it's not important, then nobody cares, right? So this northwest corner is where we look for the most significant opportunities. But I like to begin with the bubble chart to see what the shape of the data is. In this case, I mean, we sort of have two clusters. You could argue they're almost clustered together. But again, do you have a few here, a few there, one here and one there? I like to begin by looking at the shape of the data. But even then, I don't want to get too serious about drawing a lot of conclusions yet, because a fact about this chart and the MSG chart is these are using averages or means. So a question we need to ask ourselves before we can really trust this priority is, can we trust those averages? And that's where we go back to this importance and satisfaction chart together. What do I mean? Can we trust the averages? Well, for us to be able to trust the averages, we need a relatively small amount of variance in each one. So let's look at what we have. This top one, vertical crushing. Look how relatively narrow that band of importance scores are. And if I hover over, I can see the mean, the average, and I can see the standard deviation for importance. And then what about the satisfaction level? Well, again, I can see the mean, it's 5.17, and I can see the standard deviation, just greater than 1. And one of the things I love, by the way, so we use terms variance, standard deviation, and means, but you definitely do not have to be a statistical guru to use blueprinting. It's one of the things I love about it. I mean, somebody could have cranked these numbers, but we're able to visually look at the amount of variation, which I love. Now, so let's look down at recycled content. Now, look how much more variation there is here, right, for importance. Well, we even give you a little bit of feedback. Less variation is better than more variation, but the software gives you some feedback if it's excessive, greater than 2 standard deviation, or greater than 2 points, I should say. And you see where we have this dark bars at the end. And even on glue separation for satisfaction scores, let's see, we've got a little bit of dark. Now, plus or minus 2 points. It's not a magic threshold, but consider it to be sort of a rule of thumb as to where you start to be a little suspicious about the amount of variation you have. Now, if we have all tight standard deviations, that's great. We can trust the averages. So the amount of variation within a single response is something that we can trust, and man, we can come back here to Bubbles and we can get real serious about this, and we can order it, our data with the market satisfaction gaps. It's beautiful, we're ready to go. But what if we have excessive variation, like here? Well, first of all, what could be a driver of excessive variation? Well, it could be a lot of things. Let me give you a real example from my past, where we had a driver that's a variation that snuck in. So when many of you may know that most of my product development career was with John Deere, and I was working on a team where we were studying this particular tractor, a tractor loader backhoe, and it was an interesting size. Oops, somebody's in the waiting room. Sorry. Welcome, Tammy. Sorry for that. Hopefully the food was good in the green room there. Sorry for the delay. We got one more. Yeah, so I was just about to give an example of an unexpected factor that brought some variation into a project that I was working on at one point. And this product was a tractor loader. So for those of you who are not in the tractor business or haven't owned a tractor, it's the tractor is your sort of your unit. It's the little thing you drive around. The loader, it's a little scoop with the bucket, goes on the front. And the backhoe is this little digger arm. It goes in the back. You can dig holes. And I can tell you, when you're in marketing for a tractor company, you get to play with a lot of those toys. And so you get this in some cool environments. But this particular tractor loader backhoe, it was an interesting size in that it was relatively small. So it was small enough that if you were a homeowner, say if you have, I say a homeowner, if you were not a commercial operator, so you've got 50 acres, 100 acres, 1,000 acres, whatever, but of your own property, like you're not a professional hole digger, or you're not using it professionally. You're using this tractor loader backhoe to maintain your property. Okay, but it was built to commercial quality. So certainly commercial operators also purchased this exact same unit. So if you were trying to understand how many hours should this machine last, well, if you just averaged the response of all the customers, you would get a number of about 600 hours. Okay, 600 used not last, but to use 600 hours a year, I should say, which is interesting. But if you just look at the average for everybody, but when you graphed it, you had this bimodal thing where you had one little normal curve and then you had another normal curve, right? You had this bimodal distribution, a little one and a big one. And I've already given you the clue as to what explained that. The mean of one of them was like 50 hours and the mean of the other one was like 900 hours. So obviously homeowners need this thing to use this about 50 hours a year. Commercial operators would use this about 1,000 hours a year. Well, do you know who used it 600 hours a year? Nobody. Nobody. So the average was totally meaningless because you had averaged these different segments. And remember, we think of a segment as a group of customers that have similar priorities, right? They're going to prioritize these in a similar way. So that's how this variation can sneak in there. So once we have this, now we see we have excessive variation. Well, now what? What do we do? Do we need to do more preference interviews? But if so, who do we do them with? Well, here's where we can create these market views. In this case, remember, this was all interviews. And so here's one group of, and again, this is a packaging example, which some of you may remember. This is the demo all of you have access to. So for North American and European retailers, we're looking at a different slice of the data, like a particular group that had this in common. And look what happened to our standard deviations. They all got much tighter. Another group, Asian e-retailers, same. Wow, those are really tight. Shippers, again, very extremely tight, but look how they're different. So what that tells us is for this group of all interviews, right, that there's too much variation in the customer types so that we can't trust the averages. So if we build a product that would to go after these needs, in other words, what back to the MSG chart, if we can build a product that goes after these 1 through 3, it could be that 600-hour tractor. Like literally, there could be nobody. It could be nobody. So that's our process then. So we want to begin with the bubble chart, get a sense of the shape. Then we want to, you can look at the MSG when it's everybody, but it's almost just more out of passing interest, because we don't want to get too serious about it until we look at these individual slices of the data. And from there, now we can, well, because what we began with the assumption that, hey, all of our customers were within the same market, which is to say, we began with the assumption that all of our customers had the same priorities. But once we looked at the variation in the responses, we learned that wasn't true. Now, how do we create these? Well, before I go on, I'd like to show you how we create the market views and even
Scott,
review. Yeah, go ahead.
before you go on, I had a question.
Yeah.
So going back to the all interviews view of the MSG, I think what you explained about the dark bars showing up and the having the increased variability, that totally makes sense and it's very powerful. If you can, sorry, not the MSG, the
Right.
yeah,
Sorry.
yes. So in this particular example, if you look at glue separation, it has a wider bar than say box puncture, but not to where it shows the dark blue bars. Do you treat box puncture and glue separation as, showing something different, or
Glue separation. What was the other one?
like box puncture? It has a narrower bar.
Yeah. So when you see our legend here, plus or minus 1 standard deviation. And when that is greater than 2 of these scale points, I can't really show it on here, but 2 of these scale points, that's where you get the dark bars. Yeah. So, but at the same time, that's where I caution a little bit about it being a magic number. So it's not like that's great and this is terrible. I'm sorry, it's not like, you see what I'm saying? I mean, where's two that are not that far apart? I mean, this one, damage from bouncing, that's still, you see it's still pretty broad than that. I mean, you'd like to see sort of an order of magnitude, a nice one that's much tighter. At the end of the day, it's it's a bit open to your interpretation, but when it's greater than 2 points, that's where we're definitely going to tell you that it is excessive. So these are probably iffy, those 3. But in this case, but what you're analyzing though is not necessarily one, but all of them. I take that back. If you could develop a new product that addresses some of these that they have a lot of agreement on, right? A lot of agreement on, and then if you move the needle on these, then that's something that will be significant. But if one of these top ones had a lot of variation in it, you wouldn't want to go after that one. Having said that, I'm still going to push one step further and look at some subsets to see, because I want to know about the order of everything, right? I want to be able to trust these numbers for everything. But at the end of the day, it sort of depends on what my innovation objectives are. If I feel like, this is good enough, I can move the needle on these 3 and we can really create a new product that's awesome. And these down here, not that big a deal. But I think you would still, at least as you would want to at least look at what is driving even this variation. So let's just pick one. I mean, again, this is just a demo. So to the degree this lines up reality may not be there, but shippers, have this, apparently the effort to seal the box. I mean, again, I don't know, this is just made up, but the effort to seal the box, they don't care about that at all, which presumably because they're not sealing it, like somebody else is doing it. So it's like, whatever, they don't care. Excuse me. Not surprisingly, they're quite satisfied. Shoba, I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Yeah, no, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, awesome. All right, anybody else? I want to show you how to create these views. All right, I'll go to that. Anybody just jump in anytime. So first of all, we've got these views. We can change them. But instead of that, let me show you how you create a market view. So you create a market view right here How did I get here, by the way? It's just right under 3.6. And then from there, you can give it, whatever name you want. Market view. And then you can quickly sort of auto select by, hey, I want to only select, Latin America, or, I can select all of them. Or I can select, I just really want this particular value chain position. Or I want to protect, I only want to look at, all regions, all value chains, but only mixed, I'm sorry, only medium to large packages. And you can see as I make these changes, you can see it selects or deselects certain customers. Now, that's one approach. That's when you select these filters. The other thing you can do is you can select this. See, that's under this descriptors tab. The other thing you can do is this data tab. In which case, remember, one thing we were sort of curious about is what's like, wow, for what particular customers are driving certain answers, right? And so you could literally look at the individual responses and let me just like that. You can look at the individual responses and you can deselect, you can deselect certain companies, and you could certainly drive the amount of variation by just selecting or deselecting certain companies based on what their scores are. Now, what's interesting about this is, for the high-powered methods that like B2C companies use, or market research done, like when you have very high sample sizes, essentially this is what somebody's doing. I mean, but you're using very sophisticated statistical tools. You're not looking at each response one at a time, but it's essentially the same thing. Now, one more thing, by the way, that you can also do, again, B2B, or B2B specialized here, is that, what if, imagine Amazon's probably isn't a bad assumption, is like a much more significant customer to the rest. And we want to weight them 40%. That you can see that you can do that. So you can weight a particular customer, whatever, based on their purchasing power, or based on how significant you think they'll be in the future, or based on whatever logic you want or have, you can weight a particular customer. So here's my market view. So if I leave it this way, I've deselected a couple customers and I've overweighted Amazon. So now we can go back to my market view and you can see that we didn't help anything, right? We actually have more variation now than we had before. But that will be a bit of an iterative process, right? So we're going back and forth. And obviously that selection did not remove any variation. So that didn't really help us. But anyway, that's how you would create one. Any questions? Now, while you're mulling that over, one more thing I would like to show you. So I want to remind you, where do these big categories come from? These came from back in step 2 under settings. I'm sorry, 2.1. I know I clicked through a little quickly sometimes. Back in step 1, we set up these regions, we set up the value chain positions, and actually this job function does not come into play right now. Then you've got the package size. So you can do this anywhere along the way, but ideally, when you're setting your project up, you want to ask yourself this question: what variables do we think could alter the priorities? What variables do you think could alter the priorities? And the scenario I sort of have landed on when I'm explaining this, for better or worse, is planning a Disney World vacation. Okay, that's something we do in our house for these crazy Disney people. It's awfully expensive. You can do a lot of probably more interesting trips for less money. But anyway, I've got 2 young girls, so that's what we do. But if you were studying the job of planning a Disney World vacation, certainly one variable you might have here is are you local or not? So you could have local to Florida, or you might have you're flying, flying in, or driving, whatever. And in this case, I would change instead of reason, I would call it transportation method. Whatever. And then, something else you might have is, family. I don't know what you call this, family type, maybe. Maybe this could be adults only. And then, toddlers. I don't know. This isn't complete, but maybe older kids. So this is a thought experiment we would have before starting, right? Because if I'm planning a Disney World vacation, if I'm flying versus driving versus I'm local, well, if I'm local, I'm not even booking hotels, right? If I'm local, I'm not worried about how much stuff I can bring. Certainly driving versus flying. And I'm sure we could think of, things we might have to take extra care with. If we're bringing toddlers, you're probably bringing a stroller, and that means when you're traveling within Orlando, you have to think about car seats and all that kind of stuff. And if you're adults only, you're grabbing an Uber, and you're certain things are easier. But the point is, this would impact your priorities for sure. And so early on in a project, you want to have this little thought experiment. What variables do we think would change what our customers' priorities would be? And this is often it takes a little bit of thinking. Now I'm going to reset this so it doesn't. So it's sort of I think that takes my stayed in there. Interesting. So that I'm sure that'll do all kind of fun stuff over here. But anyway, so that's a thought experiment you'll want to do. Interesting, still in there. That's a thought experiment you'll want to do early on in a project. So really, that's the big thing. So let me review a little bit, then we'll see if there are any questions, and then if we have any questions about anything whatsoever. So back in Discovery, or at least within 2, we're going to put in these settings for here. You have 3 variables you can use as to what variables might impact the priorities that a customer would have. When we get ready to analyze our data, we're going to begin with all interviews. And we're going to, again, this is maybe a little personal preference, but I go to bubbles first, and I look at the shape of the data. Is it all together? Are they all spread out? Again, I'll probably look at the overall priorities, but I'm not taking anything too seriously yet. I go to importance versus satisfaction. I look at the amount of variation. And if I have excessive variation, then I'm going to start looking at some of these data slices, these subgroups, and I build those groups down here with this market view tool. All right. Any questions about analyzing data within Blueprinter?
Hello, Scott. This is Dan.
Yeah.
When you weighted Amazon, we got some additional variability in the average. There's more standard deviation.
Yeah.
My question is it possible to look at the standard deviation for one company that had multiple interviewees?
Sure.
Because that might have been what was driving the increase in variability from Amazon, or whatever. You get the idea.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. You just have to do that. You have to think about that ahead of time, right? And that means during your preference interviews, you're going to need a separate interview for each employee if you want to gather the data that way. If you want to be able to study it that way, I should say. Otherwise, you've got one for the whole. This is and so again, this is where you just have to think about. You have to sort of evaluate those trade-offs. Like, why would you do one versus the other? Well, if you wanted to look at it by employee or by role or whatever, you would do what you said, and then back here in Discovery, you would have whatever this job function that does not flow through there. So you would want to add something like that, employee category or something.
Yeah. So Scott, just to clarify, thought when we were clicking through, there was at least one company that there had been multiple interviews. The number 9 is coming to mind. So my
Yeah.
inquiry was, oh, that was all interviews. So, okay, I understand now, and it makes sense. So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
No issues.
Okay. I love it. I don't mind issues either, but yeah.
Scott, I got a question. This is
Yeah.
Nelson. How, I'm looking at the market satisfaction. Is there any way to capture, say, how well the market is satisfied with, say, your product versus your competitor's product? In other words, they could be really satisfied with yours and it's not really a good opportunity for improvement, but they're wildly unsatisfied with all of your competitors, and vice versa. How do we differentiate between those two types of responses?
Yeah, you can do that right here. I mean, you could, but well, first of all, let me back up. Let me go through. Well, let's just look at the question. So when somebody's asked a question, they're asked how important is it to them. So this is more or less independent of any solution in the market. This should be really, in real life, there's the satisfaction and importance are, they're not completely separate, but we treat them as separate, put it that way. This is something that should be very stable. It should have like nothing to do with the mouse, how the solutions are. So let's think about, man, security with our financial data. Well, that's a big thing. How important is it to you to minimize the likelihood of, somebody stealing your financial data? 10, right? Can I get to 11? It doesn't matter what the solutions are. That's gonna be that's critical. That you don't wake up one day and you accidentally clicked on a whatever, an email, and all your money's gone. That's always going to be critical. Now, how satisfied are you with your ability to minimize the likelihood of a data breach? That's going to have everything to do with the solutions available. But this is being rated on everything I have available to me as a customer. So if your product is terrible, but I've got an alternative that's great, I'm rating this on what's great. Now, what you might do is right here capture. You could also ask that what our product is. How would you rate our product? You could ask that there, and maybe it's a whatever 7. And this actually is quite useful for later blueprinting steps. So you could gather it right there. And the other thing that's useful to you is, well, there's 2 other places. So you might get it there, what happens to be the conversation. Here, you would get this range of what test results barely acceptable and what's totally satisfied. But then this is really probably where I should have gone to your question to begin with, is what are the products to benchmark against as far as the high level of performance. But from there, it would be a bit of a manual process to use the data. But in the latter blueprinting stages, after you do your market case, let's finalize that. When you do this launch blueprint or business case in Excel, then you're able to put those numbers in there and look at the satisfaction of your product, your competition, etc. But it's not, we have that in there, but it's not in these numbers, which actually that'd be a good suggestion to put it here somewhere.
Good, thank you.
Scott, you said that you like to start with a look at the bubble chart to see the shape of the data. What are you looking for in a good data set? Is it clustered like this, or does it have something in every quadrant so you can narrow down something?
Well, it's a good question. What I'm hoping to find. So first of all, I'm hoping for something up here. What I'm hoping for may not be that relevant, but I'm interested in, are they all more or less the same or sort of similar? Is there one that's really out crazy? So if there's anything way up here, I know that's something we can't even touch. Like, we can't reduce our performance. We also can't, nobody's going to reward us for increasing it. if something's up here, that means it's very important, but like customers have great alternatives. There's no room to innovate. But I don't know if there's a good or bad to this. It just sort of is what it is. But I'm just interested in the shape. I'm looking for outliers, or are they just sort of scattered all over? I've looked at a lot of these and I've seen lots of different patterns. You know, it could be, Shoba, it could be just a personal thing. Maybe, you know, just for me, I feel like I'm backing up, getting the big picture, as opposed to if I'm looking, let's just pretend like we're good on the variances for a moment. If I'm here, I just feel like I'm missing some information. You know, I'm just, well, that's okay. Vertical crushing is most important, but I don't know. This is good to order, like, you know, the top number 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on down. But I feel like just for me personally, this gives me the best, you know, 50,000 foot view of everything that's going on. But when time comes to get serious, all right, which one are we going to go after? That's where this chart's a little more is what it's really for.
So if you had, for example, something in that upper right quadrant that was very important, but they're highly satisfied, but your product and your company is new to market, would you still, you'd still have to treat that as a, you have to hit it, right? Because they're not answering in response to your product. It's what they have. Okay.
Great question. What that means is you'd have to look at the satisfaction for that. I mean, you'd have to look at the associated performance for that. So let me take something that's easy to measure. So I was sort of using a financial example. Minimize the time to access your financial data. Let's say that's right up here. It's important, but they're pretty satisfied. Well, I would, if I'm going into banking or finance or building an app, I would need to look at all the major competitors and how long does it take for someone to access their financial data. And I know I have to be right on it, but I also know I don't really have to exceed it either. Because if I exceed it, if I can exceed it for no cost, that's fine, you know. But I know that I'm not going to be, nobody's going to reward me. Nobody's going to buy my product because I exceeded. But if I don't meet it, then they won't buy my product. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. Great questions. I enjoy this part. I enjoy a lot of the blueprinting, but I think I enjoy this because, I mean, I think there's something creative to stepping back, looking at everything, you know, then, hey, but what if, you know, what if we looked at, you know, let's go back to, sorry, I keep changing the examples on you. Let's go back to, you know, let's go back to the planning a Disney World vacation. Well, what if we looked at, you know, just groups of adults traveling? Okay. Well, what if we looked at, you know, groups of children and also in toddlers and babies? Oh, guess what? Those are all sort of the same. Oh, okay. So in that case, maybe there's just two sets. Well, actually, this is interesting, Shoba. I haven't thought, but even as you look, this is all made up information, right? But as I click through these different subgroups, look how the distribution changes. And I'm always curious, what's this thing out here all by itself? You know, so it's the least important of everything. That's kind of interesting. And this same thing, that one's out there by itself. Here they're kind of there together. You know, it's just my way of sort of trying to understand, you know, what's going on in the market. What is this data saying to me? Big picture, but ultimately where you're going to get to is, hey, once you're satisfied, the variation's small, this is really where you'll take action. But, you know, it's just like, I don't know. I don't know that it's our recommended process per se, but that's my personal approach, is begin big picture.
Yep, makes sense.
All right.
Hey, Scott, when I'm looking at different segments, the order of the outcomes changes.
You're talking about here or here?
Really on any of them. When I click through different subsegments at the top on the different tabs, the order changes. And I think we had talked on an earlier call, hopefully eventually there's a way we can like choose the order so that if we're flipping back and forth between segments, it'd be a little easier to compare
Yep.
if the bubbles are the same color on each chart.
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. So right now it's importance from high to low. But I think what you're suggesting is that you could sort of lock. Well, so that's the reason they're changing, right? Because the importance numbers are changing. But I think you're suggesting, well, let me back up. The thing that we are changing, the feature that's coming, is right now it's only sorted by importance. You can't do anything else. But we're gonna have a new feature where you can also, I want to sort by this number, like the market satisfaction gap. And so you won't have things like, see how 35's in the middle, right? You get a 47, 38, whatever. But I think you're suggesting, could you lock it in so you could just see more like box pump, like you could just keep it stable and then compare, is that right?
Yeah, maybe lock it on all interviews. And then when you're clicking through the different subsegments,
Yeah.
if you lock it in importance by all interviews, then you'll see as you click on different segments if those percentages change, and then that tells you something specific about one of the other market or one of the other slices.
I like it. You see me writing because I'll put that in our queue. I think that's an interesting idea. It might be something we could even do alongside of what we're doing to change the order. Yeah. And as you're talking, I can even see some value if you could even present a few side by side, because that is what you're doing, is comparing them. But yeah, I think that's interesting. It's a good idea. I guess the answer to your question though is no. No, we can't do that right now. But I like the idea.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, and right now I'm just looking at how the order changes when I do them side by side, and that tells you something. But the colors of the bubbles are different for the variables.
Yeah. And one reason though, it's like, as far as what action to take, it's going to be a little different from everybody. Like, what's your innovation goals? Do you want to build, like, if the most efficient manufacturing, it sort of depends what you're making, right? If you're making a chemical or if you're building a tractor, but you know, do you want to build one product for the whole market? And if so, we're going to look at this and we're going to see, you know, this variation, and maybe if we move the needle on these top four, and so there's a lot of difference in importance for this, you know, whatever the seventh outcome. Do we care as long as we're moving the needle on these four? Or you know what, we really want to have product A and product B really optimized for each market. So we're going to have one product going after this one and one product going after this one. So your manufacturing strategy is going to come into play a little bit as to what are you going after. You know, it's interesting. One thing that I won't say people do wrong, but there's an assumption that as soon as we finish our preference interviews, it's just obvious what to do. We're ready to go. Which that's just not, I think it's much wiser to give yourself some time to have these conversations, to analyze the data, get some feedback. It's going to have a lot to do, again, with your manufacturing strategy. Are you going to pursue one? Are you going to pursue one product to go after the whole market? Or are we going to have a couple products? Or are we going to have a core technology, right? Like a core platform. And from there, we're going to build sort of a family of products. And from this core, maybe this core platform moves the needle on these top four, and then we're going to have a couple little iterations, one for this group that really helps out with a couple things, and or maybe these are kits, or there's something modular about your product, whether it's something added after or during manufacturing. And so, I mean, those are pretty strategic decisions. So it's definitely well, I think leaders fall into this a lot. They're like, all right, you finished the blueprinter project. Now we know what to do. Now you've gotten good information, but as far as what to do, you know, give yourself time to think about it. And you sort of have to meld it with your manufacturing strategy and your overall strategy. And also, by the way, you don't even know what your new products are going to be, right? You probably want to have some idea generation sessions, and So the data analysis is definitely not like an hour event, but we finished our data analysis. Although you can certainly make it, you certainly will want to have at least determined what these sub segments are. But as far as what to do about it, who knows? You could be studying this for years to come, and that's not a bad thing. I think this is the fun part, really. Sorry.
Scott, I have a question about the data that goes into these analyses. So this happens in the discovery interview and primarily from that importance versus satisfaction number scale that they respond to.
Right.
What I've seen is that there's a lot of variability in people's kind of benchmark for what those numbers mean. Like some people are naturally likely to give everything a 10, and some people are very reluctant to give things, anything over a 5. How do you account for like the personal variability on what number scales mean to people?
Yeah, you have this challenge a lot when you, or I should say this comes up more if you're doing, say, a survey and you're doing one in North America and one in Europe and one in Asia. That's where I've personally seen this come up the most, where you sort of have these cultural norms sort of coming in, influencing the numbers. I mean, what we try to do here, right, is that's why we have this calibrated. In fact, this satisfaction, I think, is a great example. 5 is barely acceptable, 7 is good, 3 is unsatisfied, 1's totally unsatisfied. So we'll try to handle some of that during the preference interview, right? By calling out this scale. But there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. There can be some differences in that. At the end of the day, when do we learn that? We'll learn that. We'll learn that right here, right? And when we have variation, the first thing we know is we have variation. Next question is, well, what's the cause of it? What's the driver of it? And then we've got our sort of predetermined hypotheses we can look through. But then we don't, but there certainly could be things, a whole bucket of things we didn't account for, one of which is an individual difference in calibration. But I think I've personally only really seen this as an issue with cross-cultural studies.
No, and this is where I'm seeing it too, except that these customers are all in the US, but they come from different cultures. And so they're bringing the cultural preferences with them.
Yeah, that's a great point. So what you would want to do then, and this probably would take some sensitivity. Well, maybe they don't need to know about it. I mean, look, we're just trying to understand the drivers of variation. In which case, if you were interviewing individuals, I mean, if what culture they came from, you'd want to capture that here. Culture A, B, C, D. And then, because if you think that could be a cause, and then when you get here, then we could see. Now, what would be interesting though, is even if you had a lot of variation, but is there still a lot of agreement even on the order, right? So if culture A, doesn't really ever think, nothing's ever a 10. And culture B is like, very, a 10, but if they're moving up and down together, then you're still learning what you need, because ultimately this order is the thing you're interested in. And it doesn't, is it a 43 or a 39? It just really doesn't matter. Just what are the top few, what's the priority order of things you're going to work on? And by the way, that reminds me of something else. We have this, the problem with numbers with precision is it almost gives us a false sense of precision, it's more important about the order, which I guess is also part of why I like this importance versus satisfaction, because I mean, it has, of course, the numbers are there, but we're getting a bit more of a qualitative look at, I mean, just look at these are all around the same of importance, right? But look how they're strung out with different satisfaction levels. I feel like that I learned something there. And then this poor thing is all by itself.
I wonder if there's like an ability to come up with some sort of a calibration question, something that, should be like everyone should respond in a certain way. Like one or two of those, and then use those to weight the responses, or you can slice based on people for whom, something good was a 10 or something good was a 5.
You could do that. But he would have to add that calibration question. I say you could do that.
Right. Yep.
If you knew it, you could, you could change. Well, yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess you can't do that within here, but yeah, that would be an interesting technical solution. I get a little weird. I get a little concerned with a lot of waiting for data though, because it opens up the possibility for the data analyst to create a story.
True.
As opposed to telling it. But I think that's an interesting solution to that. And it's absolutely a real thing. Again, the only across cultures is really the only time I've personally seen that come up, but I'm sure there could, but even within the US, like urban, rural, north, south, west coast. I mean, we have lots of cultures even within the country, right? But it's mainly across international boundaries is where you can definitely see that.
Thank you. Cool. Yep.
Yeah. Any question about this or any blueprinting, anything? All right, y'all can still noodle on that. I'll pull up let's look at what our next masterclass topic is. And let's see, this was today. So connecting blueprinting with stage and gate. Interesting. We had this was originally scheduled for the spring, and we had to move it for various reasons, and had lots of folks contact me who were really interested in how this would work. So look forward to kicking off that conversation here in a couple of weeks. All right, well, I really enjoyed this today. Any final questions or thoughts or observations or other geographic oddities anybody would like to share? All right, I'll take that as we're good. Well, thanks everybody. Great questions. Enjoyed the discussion. And hey, reach out to me anytime. Otherwise, we'll see you right here in a couple weeks.
Thanks, Scott. It was very
Thank
helpful.
you, Scott.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye now.
Thank you.